power structure in Washington. My name is Abby Clements, and I am the Institute's Student Events Assistant and member of the Dole Institute Student Advisory Board, the official student group of the Institute. I'm currently interning here in Washington at the House of Representatives in Congressman Emanuel Cleaver's office, where I work directly with constituents and get a close look at the inner workings of Congress. The Dole Institute of Politics strives to promote a new era of leadership that uses politics to bring people together through opportunities that emphasize bipartisan cooperation, public service, and civic education and engagement, all of which is inspired by the leadership and service of Senators Bob and Elizabeth Dole and the enduring civic contributions of the greatest generation. The Student Advisory Board is the integral part of this mission, providing students at the University of Kansas with experiential learning and job opportunities, access to financial assistance, and networking opportunities with our special guests. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you to please silence your cell phones. Following the interview, there will be time for a limited number of audience questions to be answered. Members of our in-person audience can raise their hands, and a student with a microphone will come to you. If you are part of our virtual audience, you can submit questions via email to dolequestions@ku.edu. The Dole Institute aims to foster civil and respectful discussion around important and often difficult topics. Please phrase your question with this in mind. Now please join me in welcoming Dole Institute Director Audrey Coleman.
Thank you, Abby. It's so much fun to be with you all in DC instead of in Lawrence, Kansas, a change of scenery. And as Abby introduced herself, she's interning here in DC and our student events coordinator. So we had no choice but to pick up the operation and move it to DC so she could help us out. Our student advisory board students are just that outstanding. But it's such a pleasure to be here. Welcome you all. We've rarely replicated the same group of students, student advisory board alums, professionals, community members, and supporters of the Dole Institute. And so this is just very exciting for us to host the Dole Forum here in DC for the first time. I want to thank Board of Advisors member CJ Mahoney, who is a native of Russell, Kansas, and in leadership here at Microsoft for his helping us be hosted here today with Microsoft. The team at Microsoft has been fantastic. We appreciate your support. And other board members in the audience. I see Eric Pauls, recognizing board members. Thank you for being here, Eric. Jerry Seib has been a fellow and affiliate with the Dole Institute for some time and started his fellowship in 2022, breaking down the midterm elections with us. He's been a fantastic collaborator ever since, and I'm so pleased that he helped us put together this program, this conversation for you all this afternoon. Jerry, I will turn it over to you to introduce our guests and start our conversations. Thanks so much.
Thanks to all of you for being here. You know, this is a little different because, not just because it's in Washington, but this is by design a small, select, invitation-only audience, and I hope that that allows us, for me to get out of the way, frankly, a little bit after we talk for a little bit and open it up to a discussion. I mean, we have a lot of people in this audience who know a lot about what we're going to discuss. You know, I'm looking at you, Bill Galston, and you, Alex, and you, Brendan. And so I hope that some of that expertise can come to the fore and we can have a real conversation before too long. But I'll start out by talking to these two guys for a few minutes. And I'll start by introducing Ram, and I don't really know where to begin except to say that we met the weekend of Bill Clinton's inaugural at a party right over there. I remember it, you probably don't. And then for Ram, it all went downhill from there. I mean, he worked for the Clinton, in the Clinton White House for the entire term. He became a member of Congress from Illinois, ran the DCCC, the Congressional Campaign Committee, became mayor of Chicago, and most recently was the U.S. ambassador to Japan. And now he's back to do, maybe you'll tell us. Anyway, thanks for being here. And he braved the winds yesterday to fly in here, so I'm grateful for that. Alex Latcham is somebody who I got to know more recently when you took part in our post-election conference at the Dole Institute out in Lawrence. He had just finished serving as deputy political director of the Trump 2024 presidential campaign, which, as I understand, was a successful presidential campaign. He had previously worked in the first Trump White House in the Office of Political Affairs, and is now going to be the executive director of the Senate Leadership Fund, which is the big PAC that Republican senators rely on to get themselves elected and reelected. And you were previously political director of the Republican Party of Iowa, right?
That's right.
Iowa guy, so he's from the Midwest. So Anyway, thank you both for being here. Alex, let me start with you. In the first Trump term, there was at the very beginning, and really throughout, a fair amount of tension between Republicans in Congress and Republicans in the White House. This time, that's not the case. There seems to be a lot more acquiescence from the Hill to President Trump and his team at the White House. How do you explain the difference? What changed?
First, I want to acknowledge when you were going through Ram's bio, I'm definitely the young guy here, and I think he may have some socks that are older than me. So I'm going to just try to keep up with him. But yeah, in terms of obviously the first administration, I've been was with the president since day one. So much of Congress is built on relationships, as we know, on shared history. Donald Trump came in as an outsider candidate, had never served in politics before, had never served in D.C. in any capacity. And so, I think, look back at the turnover since then in Congress, right? Back when you had Jeff Flake in the Senate, John McCain, Bob Corker, Paul Ryan. It's just a fundamentally different party today. Well over half of members have either served since President Trump was first elected or under Joe Biden and now President Trump again. So it's just a fundamentally different Congress. It's a fundamentally different party than when he first took office.
So do you think President Trump wants to cooperate with Democrats, or does he actually not feel like he needs that right now?
I think in certain cases, the president always wants to come to a deal, and if he can do so with a coalition of Democrats and Republicans and even independents in some cases, he's inclined to do so. We all know he loves a good deal. He also loves when he earns bipartisan praise. And so on certain things, on certain topics, whether it's remaining tough on China, whether it's enforcing the border, some of the fentanyl crossing the southern border, I think he absolutely will. I think, the question is, are Democrats inclined to cooperate with him? And certainly are Republicans inclined to cooperate with their Democratic counterparts?
All right, Ram, you're grinning.
I was only agreeing because he says he appreciates Democratic praise. I would say I think he just appreciates praise. He doesn't really have a particular interest in what party it comes from. I think flattery is something he really likes. Just a one man's view. That's all. Sure.
So, as I said, you've been White House Chief of Staff. You worked with the Hill. You were a senior member of the Democratic caucus in the House yourself. You're in one of those positions now. What are you telling fellow Democrats? Should this be confrontation all the time? Do you want to find places to cooperate? What's the strategy?
Well, a couple. One is I don't think you just find confrontation all the time, because at that point, they're close to having you on mute anyway. If it's only one tone, they'll shut you down. So that's number one. And I do think part of getting heard is probably saying something unexpected rather than what's expected. But my own view, like an example, as it relates to fentanyl, I'm in. We're not going to have 100,000 Americans die every year. So I'm in. What do we got to do? Now, it doesn't mean it's only what you got to do, but if you agree, this is true about any president, it's not just true about it. If you agree on the basic premise, we're going to argue about how to implement. That's okay. That's, but I would say fentanyl, I'm not losing another 100,000 Americans. I say that as the mayor of the first city that sued pharmaceutical companies over opiates back in 2014. So I'm 100% in on this. But that was the part for you, okay? On the but part, I would say you're not paying for Greenland on our property, on our money. We're about, it's not the price of Greenland, it's the price of groceries. Do you want to build housing in Gaza? No, we're going to build housing right here. Okay, and to me, the idea that you're going to talk about 200,000 units of housing when we have a housing shortage in America, not a chance. And so I think tactically, there's a yes, one or two, and that's your green card to get in on everything else. I don't think you go after Elon Musk. You go after what Elon Musk is doing. I believe fundamentally, and this is also supported by data, you do not have somebody running around on the privacy of people's tax returns or medical records. There's a thread that's strong about personal privacy I also don't think you do it when a person's trying to build up a database for their AI company. But on the privacy, not about Donald Trump, not about Elon Musk, et cetera, et cetera. Don't get distracted by the shiny bauble that's over here. Core about results, not the rules. And I think, and I've said this, and lastly, I'll shut up about this, but this is something, it's not just on Congress. I would not, as I said this publicly, and got a lot of hate mail, I wouldn't die on the hill of USAID. I care about it. I was an ambassador. We had the biggest office in Asia, USAID. I care about it. But if you're going to do a protest, I would do it on the fact that 8th graders can't read. I don't understand why a Democratic governor is not calling for an emergency meeting of the Governors Association on the fact that we have the worst reading scores in 30 years. You're a governor. You control actually school budgets. And I would say we're going to have an emergency meeting. We're not going to get help out of the White House. The president's not interested in this. He is only interested in the letters D, E, and I. And I want to know why our kids don't know what the letters D, E, and I mean. And that's what I would be about. But I think, there's a place I would agree. There's a place I would fundamentally, and I would focus on the core things that matter to the American people don't matter to you. Meaning, and I don't want to get over-exemplified about this, but if you look at all the articles all the time, airtime on USAID, and you look at all the times on the fact that 8th graders had their worst reading scores in 30 years, and you tell me the volume between this and this. As my grandfather, the great political strategist Herman Schmulevitz said, this is a shanda. Obviously, we have a minion, because 3 people laughed here, okay?
Okay, so quick footnote.
Yeah.
Would you let the government shut down in 3 weeks when the deadline?
I actually think, so this is where I don't think the Democrats' position should be this. The White House microphone is bigger than anything you got, and the gavel's bigger. I would lay out right now, here are my 5 principles, or my 5 objectives. So if they don't hit them, you said, hey, we told you what we were for. You didn't want to negotiate. You didn't want to discuss. The idea that you're sitting like this, oh, you have the majority, we're going to wait, they are going to wrap that around your neck. And your best protection is to say what you're for at this point, rather than you're the majority, it's up to you. I would make sure you have all your protective gear on, and also what you're for. It's a great contrast point, because there isn't a week from now, it's going to come down, the clock's going to start, and everybody's going to be why can't we, the government's going to shut down, and everybody's going to pant and be breathless. We told you what we were for 3 weeks ago.
So Alex, I want to talk a little bit about where Republicans, when Ram talked about how Democrats might draw some lines.
It's Mr. Ambassador.
Mr. Ambassador.
Okay.
Yeah,
I went through Senate conference.
Were you confirmed?
I know, it's really
Okay,
scary,
it's hard
isn't
to
it?
believe. So Ram talked about where Democrats might draw some lines. I'm curious where Republicans might draw lines, because as I said at the outset, at this point there hasn't been any line drawing. The cabinet picks got through. It's been kind of a kumbaya sort of period of several weeks, but that probably can't last. What's your sense, since you deal and are going to deal a lot more with Republicans, particularly in the Senate, where do they want to assert themselves and when, and how will we know when that time has come?
As a good staffer, I never want to get in front of my principals, but that being said, I mean, I can tell you at least from a process standpoint, right? The best way to negotiate and to put a foot or a line in the sand with President Trump is behind closed doors. And be very firm with him and with the White House and the administration about what you want to see accomplished, what you're not willing to see happen, and do so in a closed setting. Going out and tweeting out and saying, I am adamantly opposed to X, Y, Z. While it may help with your fundraising or your messaging or to generate some independent credibility in your state, from an actionable, real negotiating position, it is not well received by the administration. And so what I would say is with President Trump, I mean, look, again, he is always willing to hear competing perspectives. In fact, that's what he wants, right? That's his entire reason for picking so many different cabinet members across the ideological spectrum, is he wants individuals in his office arguing different points and perspectives, and that includes when it comes to Congress.
And if that's the case, do you think that's happening now? What's your
Absolutely.
sense?
Absolutely.
You think that is happening?
Absolutely. As we talk about, some of it is more of a process standpoint, as we talk about reconciliation, the one-track bill versus the two-track bill. Some of it, again, is on the executive orders, obviously on some of the appointments. I mean, Congress has tremendous influence and ultimately, and has had a tremendous influence in who the president appoints as well. So, you know, you will see him engage with Congress and other stakeholders in a pretty frequent, regular way.
So, Mr. Ambassador here is so diplomatic and polite. He probably won't ask this, so let me ask.
I'm not sure that diplomatic immunity goes that far.
No, it's over.
Yeah.
If I were a Democrat on the Hill and you were a Republican colleague of mine, I might walk up to you and say, your president has just declared that as long as he's saving the country, no law applies to him. Why are we here? Why are we bothering to legislate? Why don't we just go home? What's the correct answer to that?
Well, I think the president has been clear that and even as early as recent, rather, 2-3 days ago, he said, I pay attention to the courts. I mean, he did so when he went through all of the legal cases when he was out of power. He certainly respects the rule of law in the courts, and so, you know, I think that he absolutely, when it comes to courts, when it comes to legislation, I mean, there will be a day, perhaps, that Democrats are in the majority, and at that point in time, you know, he operates within the guidelines of D.C. when it comes to legislation and court rulings.
You think that's true?
You asking me?
Yeah.
No.
Okay. So what do you do about it?
No, look, I mean, I think there's a couple things you would do, but there's going to be a bigger question in that question, because I think there's a value and a principle and an outlook that underpin that tweet that you talked about. And I'm not a lawyer, but you either believe in the separation of powers and 3 equal branches of government that have a check and balance and the concept of the diffusion of power, or you believe there's a first among all equals. And some people do believe that. There's going to be a constitutional legal that's going to end up in a court that I don't think calls balls and strikes like the Supreme Court justice thinks. But there's basically 2 different views. It's not the first time. We're going to it's going to end up one way or another in front of the Supreme Court, which kind of interpretation of the Constitution is the correct one. The separation of powers, the 3 equal branches of government, where the Congress actually does control the purse strings, or we don't. And there's one first among all equals and has a kind of imperial-like power and presence, which is written about both in the Constitution, Federalist Papers, and other commentary and other court rulings. I think you know where I come down. I do find it, I will just say this, I mean, we're looking at all this, how many articles and how much screaming there was about a healthcare czar.
Mm-hmm.
All right? If I had told you that the IRS was looking at people's tax returns or something, there would be, all hell would break loose. You have somebody looking at people's tax returns, and I get back to this, and again, I can't turn on my TV with all the remote controls, so I don't know anything about AI, but it's building an AI company, and the greatest collection of data about U.S. citizens is in the U.S. government, SANS. And they are going through medical records, they're going through people's tax returns. And we have a reason you can't go through tax returns, because it was tried once before by another administration, and it doesn't happen. It's not supposed to, it's against the law. And so there is a purse string argument. He has appealed cases, that is not inaccurate, but he has a view of the presidency and the authority and the power of the presidency that's in direct contrast to another.
Yeah.
So there's a real question here. Obviously he thinks, because of the way he said it, we're going to go right to the Supreme Court. He has a view of John Roberts and his idea that he's going to call balls and strikes. I don't have the confidence. I mean, he has a reason for that confidence. Yeah. I would not.
But Alex, you've worked with President Trump on and off over the last 8-9 years. I have a view, which I wrote in a piece a couple of weeks ago, that basically his MO is to push as far as he can to find out where the limits of his power are and then go to that limit. And that we're in a phase now in which he's trying to figure out exactly what is the limit of his power.
That's right.
Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, but I don't think this is unique to President Trump, though. I mean, I think we've seen the powers of administrations, presidencies expand every single administration. And so, certainly President Trump understands, power politics, if you will. He is going to push that envelope and see where he'll be challenged by Congress or the courts, but this is not new to him. This is, and he was doing this, from day one when he was sworn into office in 2017.
But what's different about him now versus 2017? Something's different.
Candidly, I think President Trump feels like he has a mandate. I think he feels like he has a mandate from the American people. He won the most.
In a way he didn't in 2017.
That's right. That's right. That's exactly right.
And the mandate is to do what?
To deliver for exactly what he said he was going to do during the last campaign. I mean, he much of what he is doing, at least the big picture items, he said very, very explicitly that he was going to do those things. And so I think he has a list of items that he looks at every single day and says, all right, have we done this? Have we done this? Have we done this? And he feels like he has a mandate, having received more votes than any other Republican candidate for president in history.
Look, I mean, I think I was in Tokyo, so maybe it didn't come across. I don't remember the Panama Canal argument during the campaign. I don't remember the price of Greenland in the campaign, and I definitely don't remember the Gulf of America or the 51st state for Canada, which would be good for Democrats if that happens. Okay? We're for that. That's that and Puerto Rico. We're in it. That's good. But to me, no, that's not I don't buy the premise of 49.1% as a mandate. That's a plurality, not a majority. So the fact is, now he may believe that. I think he wants to repeat it as a tactic, which is if you say it long enough, people will come along and repeat it. But he didn't get a mandate. He got a plurality. And I think that is where the Democrats should gain, not confidence, big C, but know that they have a leg to stand on in this battle. And I do think, though, and this is, I think ultimately, and Jerry, you were in Washington, the Democrats need to be preparing and laying the groundwork what will be both the government funding and the tax fight. That's where they're going to either yes or no fund their sea legs. Now, to your voice of trying to scratch the Republicans and bring the members of Congress back to life like they exist independently, you're going to start in that process cutting things that matter to an individual senator, an individual member of Congress, and either they're going to come to life or this is going to be a battle about some core principles. Another example, this is a cabinet with more billionaires than ever before. There's going to be a tax bill. Now, either their family's going to be well-fed or your family's going to get well-fed, but not both families are going to get well-fed. And that is going to consume a huge amount of energy. It's a defining moment for Democrats, what they believe in. And I think both that, the funding of government and the tax bill, not only take up oxygen, it's relevant to the American people, and that's where the Democrats should find their voice. I would hope they find it sooner, but that's a given that they can.
I want to ask you about the Democratic voice in a minute, because that's a questionable
We prefer a chorus.
Yeah, of course. But since we talked about constituencies out there, and you're from Iowa, I'm from Kansas, farmers are already feeling the hit. Yeah. Do you think that is having an effect? Or is Joni Ernst worried about what Iowa farmers think? I know Jerry Moran's worried about what Kansas farmers think at this point, just as an example of how this is not all cost-free when you do big things and break the crockery.
That's right. That's right. I mean, the reality is, again, farmers have not been doing well and you mentioned the ag community in particular, they've not been doing well for quite some time. But I heard when I was in the White House and dealt with the Farm Bureau, the different ag groups, corn growers, soybeans, et cetera, and then just rank and file farmers, in these different states, they said, back in 2017, 2018, 2019, they said that it's worth the temporary pain if we can equalize or bring some of these trade imbalances under control. Look, I mean, ultimately, you're not going to have, there are trade-offs for everything, certainly. And I think that, we're only, 3.5 weeks into the administration. I think that those concerns will be voiced by Senator Ernst, Chuck Grassley, some very powerful ag senators And I can tell you just personally, having worked closely with the president, you know, he always typecasts me as the Iowa guy. You're my Iowa guy, right? And he always typecasts Iowa as the farmers, right? And he always asks me, he's like, how are the farmers doing, Alex? How are the farmers? And he truly cares about how people are doing, certainly economically. And so this is where I was part of several discussions with the president and members, whether it was trade negotiations or the RFS and ethanol discussions. As we know, that's big in Kansas and Iowa and elsewhere. He always usually he sided on the side of the farmers.
So speaking of Joni Ernst,
Yep.
you know where I'm going to go here. She looked like she was a no on Pete Hegseth, and then she was a yes on Pete Hegseth. What happened?
I've known Joni since 2014 when she was a state senator, 2013. And she's an incredibly thoughtful person, you know, and I think she takes, and I know she takes her role as a senator very, very seriously. And I'm not just saying that because she represents my state. You know, I think she had legitimate policy concerns about Pete, particularly as it relates to females serving in combat roles. She expressed those, and she took her role, her advice and consent role, very, very seriously, and ultimately gained assurances from Secretary Hegseth that there wouldn't be any changes to that policy in the military. And so I think she did her job.
But let's be honest, the Republican senators that you're worried about now have discovered a new reality here, which is that there's a MAGA army that can rain hellfire down on them if so called upon. How does that change this game, and is that what happened to Joni Ernst?
Look, I can't speak to Joni in particular and what pressure she didn't receive in particular. What I would say is that, you know, again, President Trump has a very energized mobile base that is unlike anything that we've seen in modern American politics. I mean, that's just the reality of the situation. And so if those individuals, those grassroots individuals feel like Congress isn't cooperating with the president or fulfilling the agenda that they elected the president on, then they're certainly going to hear from them. I mean, that's the whole point of Congress, and you know, they're closest to their constituents.
I want to turn to you all for some questions in just a minute, but let me ask two things of my own first. You referred to the Democratic Voice or chorus. What is that, by the way? Because there's no sign, if I can be so bold as to say, there's no sign Democrats had any idea what the strategy ought to be, having lost the election last November.
Well, part of that is because there's not a consensus yet why they lost.
Yeah.
And to start to build, I mean, we're going to have to do two things simultaneously. Come to grips and really understand, and I don't think it's a single answer to a single problem. There's something far deeper, and 2024 was a manifestation of that. And then also simultaneously build out and both challenge, confront, and cooperate in all three of those efforts as it relates to Trump. So I have articulated what I think it has been the problem. But rule one, and not to make it very complicated, politics is about addition, not subtraction. And if you look over 20 years, the Democratic Party has been shrinking both voters and geography. Stop, because what you're doing is not working. It's not, I mean, so I don't, sometimes we can all talk to ourselves, and everybody here would be, we all love politics, we're all, politics is addition, not subtraction. And we spent 20 years doing subtraction. And just stop. And now I think there are different pieces. I think the biggest current comes out, in my view, of this, not just this election, this moment, goes back to the Iraq War and the financial meltdown and the loss of faith that broke between the American people, government. And when you're a party that believes in government as an affirmative force versus a negative force, you're in a fundamentally tough, even though we weren't participatory, or rather the agent of either one of those policies. We cleaned up the mess from those policies. We in COVID donned the jacket of the institutionalists. And that is exactly where you don't want to be. Now then, fast forward to this moment. You can't be a progressive party and advocate for conserving institutions as if everything's perfect. You're either for change and reform, but they have now wheeled us because of the way Trump and Musk work, and I don't say that, I say that critical, but somewhat admirable, tactically. Our voice is one of preserving when nobody thinks we could run government can run a one-car parade. So what are you preserving? So that to me is the break of faith, and I think, as I said to you in the phone calls, COVID was not good for the body. It wasn't really great for the body politic. And we unbeknownst, put on a jacket that in a very time when the people hated the elite, hated the establishment, they had broken faith with the American people, we became the elite in the establishment, which is the stupidest position to be in.
Alex, I want to ask you one final thing, in a slightly different vein.
This is your third final, Jerry.
I know.
Okay.
I'm just building up a course here. So I want to ask you about Susie Wiles, who's the current White House Chief of Staff, sits in that spacious office in the corner that you used to occupy, Mr. Ambassador. And she ran the campaign. You worked for her. Describe her relationship with President Trump, because she's been amazingly below the radar screen, both through the campaign and so far in the Trump White House. How does she operate? How does she get along with the president? How does she move him if she thinks he needs to be moved to a certain spot?
Yeah. I've known Susie since 2017, back when she was a Florida operative, a vaunted Florida operative. She's had incredible successes. She's worked for some pretty hard-charging principals as well, whether it was Rick Scott or Ron DeSantis, and then ultimately Donald Trump. I mean, I would say if I could describe her in one word, it's poised. She is unflappable. I've never seen her raise her voice once, but she also commands respect from the team. And she also knows what she doesn't know, right? And so she has viewed it as her role to put the best minds and the experts around the president and elevate them. So again, that he can have a variety of opinions and options when it comes to his decision making. She also never gets ahead of the boss. That can't be said for some past chiefs of staff for President Trump. And so, when she has the added benefit of when she's negotiating with a foreign leader or a stakeholder or a member of Congress, they know that she is speaking on behalf of Donald Trump. And so, her word is the final word when it comes to that. So, I mean, she's an incredible presence, and quite frankly, President Trump is lucky to have her.
Let me open it up here. Questions, thoughts, observations. Let me start back there, and then Heidi, I'll go to you next. There's a microphone will come around. So.
Thank you all. Great panel. I'll try to be succinct. The ultimate question is the political environment that we're in sustainable, or have we reached a breaking point? And the background for that is knitting together a few of the things you said. If you think about 01 and 08 and the introduction of the iPhone that allowed the MAGA masses, or whatever masses you want those to be, that have a voice, educated, not educated, but an opinion that can move masses. And you think about the impact on Congress and the separation of powers. Some of this, I think, could be argued that Congress has not been able to function, and that has shifted this power grab by the White House. And so we have a consolidation of the electorate, in tribes. We have an environment in the media that drives decision making, whether it's based on economics or not. And then we have this environment now about the separation of powers. And the question again is this sustainable? Are we at a breaking point? Provide some hope on where we're headed here.
Yeah, and there's a good point. The ineptitude of Congress seems to have opened the door wide for what you were talking about. So is it sustainable?
Well, So I want to back off just one area. If it's about democracy and the political system and the functionality, separate Washington from state and local. You can have a battle at a state capitol or whatever, but there's no real sense of dysfunction and incapacity. That's also true as a former mayor, local government. The closer you get to where people live and work and play, more legitimacy. And when it doesn't, you get a DA recall, mayor, get voted, booted out. So get to Washington, which I often refer to as Disneyland on the Potomac. The rides aren't as exciting as Disneyland. There is a break in faith here. I sometimes get, and I'm not saying that social media doesn't have a role to play, because it's a big role, but when it gets, all problems get swept under there. And it's a very good question, because the more Congress becomes slightly dysfunctional in not handling it, it creates an opportunity for presidents to grab more power, but also to exercise more power, because the problems need addressing. I mean, here we are, 1988 was Simpson-Mazzoli last immigration bill. That was the last immigration bill done. And everything since then has been a president by executive order trying to duct tape and glue and some string and some bubble gum an immigration policy that's definitely changed since, I think it's 88, maybe it was 86. 86. When I said it, I realized that was, yeah. So that's a long time, and it's a lot. So that's I'm using that as an example that, while President Obama was protested for being a deporter-in-chief, he also did Dreamers. And I can tell you, President Clinton did Operation Gatekeeper in San Diego, Operation, Safeguard in Nogales, Arizona, and there were other things that he did. So you have we at different times when Congress has not acted, presidents have both not only reached for power, but to address that problem. And then I say that, and I want one opportunity, both on healthcare, financial meltdown. When the crisis is front and center, the Congress has acted. But another example of where it hasn't is, the War Powers Act is pretty clear about who has the power to declare war. Has not been exercised decades. And so presidents have continued, where there's a vacuum in power, people seize it. I don't know if I've answered your question, but it felt good saying what I said. So.
Anything to add? Okay. Bill here, and then Heidi, I'll come over to you. Let's come here.
Well, Jerry, I have a couple of procedural questions before I get to my substantive question.
Where's the parliamentarian?
Yeah.
Okay.
The procedural question is, are we on the record?
I think we are, because it's going out on YouTube right
All
now.
right.
So if you
We
would
revise on the record.
That's nice. And the second procedural
But now
question.
what you're going to say is way less interesting
Yeah.
than that. So.
The second question is, may I address one question to each of the panelists?
Of course
Would that
you
be
can.
in order?
Yeah.
Okay. And I'll state the questions first, and then the panelists can
Well,
respond.
maybe we want to flip who answers what.
It's democracy. I heard.
Okay, here's my question for Ram. The Republicans have made considerable headway out of the charge that blue city governance in recent years hasn't exactly been a poster boy for the way the rest of the country would like to be governed. The mayor of New York his entire administration is melting down. Karen Bass in LA has taken some really hard knocks because of the fire and her response. The mayor of Chicago has a 14% approval rating as we speak. So my question to you is, what has gone wrong with a lot of blue city governance? And given the fact that you're former mayor of Chicago, you probably have some ideas as to what could put it right. Here's my question for Alex. Roger Wicker assumed an extremely important position in the Senate as chair of the Armed Services Committee. And he said something very interesting just a few days ago. I think you know probably where I'm going. And I know how you can sidestep my question, but I hope you won't. Here's what he said. He said, after Secretary of Defense's speech in Munich, that he made a rookie mistake in, giving away NATO membership for Ukraine and saying that Ukraine would never get its territory back, et cetera. And then he went on to say, I don't know who wrote that speech. It is the kind of thing that Tucker Carlson could have written, pause, and Carlson is a fool. So here's my question for you. Was the Secretary of Defense stating administration policy in that speech? And if so, is Senator Wicker implicitly charging the President of the United States with being a fool about Ukraine?
Are you going first or me?
I got a lot to say about Ukraine, so.
Well, look, I'll answer your question in a way that candidly I know best, know how the process works, which is, again, going back to Susie Wiles, never get ahead of the boss, right? Unless it came out of his mouth and it is an official administration policy that he has stated and enumerated, either in a speech or an executive order or otherwise, assume that sometimes, individuals get ahead of their skis. And so I don't know in this particular case if that's what happened. I don't know. But I will say that the successful cabinet members, staff, et cetera, who do serve the president well are serving him from a position where he is setting the tone in the vision and the policy agenda.
So are you saying that he was not stating administration policy?
That I again, unless it came out of the president's mouth, I wouldn't necessarily say either way.
So you did sidestep my question.
One, I have a piece in the Post coming out.
I forgot to mention, Ram is now, so welcome to the Columnist Club.
Yeah.
He's a columnist for the Washington
The
Post
cozy
now.
comfort of a column.
Yeah, that's great.
That I will also, so I talk about, because I think we're in a very, very dangerous period of time when both we agree on the spheres of influence and might makes right. And we abandon what we have done and built tirelessly over 80 years, those winning the Cold War and isolating China in its own backyard. This is the idea that we could say, you're not coming, either Europe or Ukraine, to a negotiations. Russia calls it negotiations, we're calling it mediation. We never even meet with the other party in the mediation. This is a dangerous place we're going, because we not only stylistically, the president fundamentally agrees with two people, Putin and Xi, who have stated explicitly their goal is to bury the United States. And this is dangerous because we are fighting their fight on their terms, not on our terms. That's my answer. And no member of the cabinet disagreed with the Secretary of Defense in Saudi Arabia. So he may have gotten ahead of the president, but nobody's repudiated the point that they're not joining NATO. Number two, to your question, I do think mayors, to the question that was directed at me, mayors, be honest and straightforward. One, you look at San Francisco election, you look at DA elections, I actually think there is a counter-reaction to the 6 years of permissiveness. And permissive is not just on public safety. On homelessness, on open drug markets, et cetera. There is a snapback happening. It will come to Washington, where Washington Democrats will realize, oh, people don't like that. I mean, a classic example of what I mean that it's what's happening locally, there's a state senator running for mayor in New York. 3 years ago, in the height of defunding the police, which is probably the stupidest phrase I've ever heard, this state senator was for expunging criminals' records. Now he's for adding 3,000 cops to New York. That tells you everything you need to know about the mind shift. But I do think there's a lesson here. And the Democrats, taking a page out of 2020, Project 2025, assuming you're going to get back to the Oval Office in the next 4 to 8 years, should have a vision of a fundamental overhaul of the government. We should be in the role, politically and substantively, in the role of advocacy and reform. Now, I'm dating myself. In the last 30 years, and I'm doing this by memory, but the highest rating in people's positive view of government as an affirmative, put aside your dissonance of this policy or that policy, was the period of window of where welfare reform got done and the budget was balanced. People thought the government not only could be tamed, but you could make changes. And I think, as the governor in Pennsylvania showed when the ramp fell down in Pennsylvania, and the governor in California showed on housing, they should take an overall view and say, on energy, housing, I mean, you can pick 3 or 4 subjects, what stays and what goes, and nothing is sacrosanct. Now, I'm going to say this as a mayor, and in a forum when you were at the Wall Street Journal, I talked about in 2012 permitting reform. I was building an L on the south side of McCormick Place, up above. It was a gravel pit lot. We did an environmental study, 18 months. Now, it could have been 16 months, but it was more than a year, less than 2. The state then does their own study, another 18 months. We submit it to the feds. They then ask us a series of questions about our studies, et cetera. It's an empty lot on the south side of Chicago, where I'm trying to build a train station that will service McCormick Place, an economic engine in the near south side. We spent 3 years doing 2+ environmental studies on an empty lot that wasn't below ground, so we were not hitting any oil or tankers or anything like that. Not everything is perfect. And I think we should take topic A, housing. What stays, what goes? And it's not all permitting, but there's a lot of different things. Take energy production and energy transmission. What stays, what goes? Pick another topic, education. What stays, what goes, what has to be added. The whole thing. And I think that's what Democrats, and you're going to see that at the local level, and that spirit will come. And cities have allowed a culture, a value system, and then a culture of permissiveness to set in that has made cities reverse the good thing for cities was 30 years migration to cities. There's been a breakdown on safety, there's been a breakdown on housing, there's been a breakdown on the permissiveness in and around drugs, et cetera. We can discuss what are the right policies to deal with the crisis of drug use. I don't think it's permissiveness, but let's talk about it. And now there's a migration out of cities. And if you believe in cities and you believe in them as economic engines in metropolitan areas, you can't have people fleeing as a tax base when you're trying to do more things. That's a losing proposition. You're trying to do more services and your tax base is going down. That is not going to work. As you probably could tell, I need to take my medication. I'm a little upset about this. But this is insane to me. And so I do think you're seeing that change. But I think if we were honest, we had to stay back, say, okay, what stays, what goes? Take 4 or 5 subjects. And we should be the party that's for overhauling things that don't work and be honest about them.
So many.
You get promised Heidi. I'm Heidi's lawyer. Heidi gets a question.
Heidi's and then we'll go back to Gene after that.
Okay, hi guys. Thank you again.
No pressure, Heidi. Come on.
I know, it's a lot of pressure. Thank you again for doing this. I work in more of the foreign policy sphere for an organization that does do a lot in Ukraine, so I'm going to direct it back to Ukraine a little bit. I know you said you had a lot to say on Ukraine. So obviously a lot of the decisions Trump has been making on these in Ukraine has been very controversial, and a lot of people have a lot of opinions on it. But what's his plan, do you think, going into these peace talks, and what should be his strategy going forward? And kind of to you, what should Democrats do in response? Like, do they fall in line behind and just let Trump do his thing, or do they take their own stance? As I do know, a lot of Democrats stand with Ukraine for the most part. So just kind of, yeah.
Well, I'll let
the ambassador take this, because he's actually been confirmed by the Senate and served in a foreign policy role. I have not. I'm just a political operative. But what I will say is, the president has been genuinely mortified by the killings, the death, the destruction in Ukraine. Obviously, we can talk about the different territories that the Russians currently hold, lines of demarcation, and where in the negotiations and what parties are negotiating. And I think those are important conversations to have. But he's been pretty consistent. He wants to see the conflict end. And I know that has been weighing on him. Even just before the election, he would say privately to some aides, can you believe the destruction, the death? We've got to stop this. We have to stop this. And so, I think these negotiations and discussions are very, very fluid and very, very fast moving too. Again, I'm not privy to any of those, and I read just as you do what's in the public. But I'm sure the ambassador has plenty of thoughts too.
Yeah, I have more. Well, here's what I would say first of all, to the core question about Democrats. I think this is, for a certain amount of audiences. I'm still into prices of groceries versus the prices of Greenland. Okay, that's where I go. But I do believe this is a core point here. Now, the administration today, the 3 representatives for the United States said that we're mediating. It's like shuttle diplomacy. That was what the National Security Advisor said. Well, there was no visual picture of us sitting down with Ukrainians. There was a gentleman who has now been sent to Kyiv who wasn't in the room to tell. That's not a mediation. There's a sovereign nation here. Now, basic approach, in my view, has been Putin got both the right to say he's sitting with the United States, so he's got his now superpower status that he wanted, win. He's got Ukraine can never join NATO, win. He's gotten the 4 territories and provinces that he wanted, Donbass, etc., win. So now they've added, here's our newest things. We want a whole European architecture, which I actually think is an opening. The Europeans should say, great, we're coming to the table. We're ready to have that discussion. Because the last thing Putin wants is the United States and Russia there. Now, the United States has said, we're mediating. I don't see the mediation. If you're going to stupidly, and I say that stupidly, say that before the negotiations, Ukraine does not get NATO, then you at least should say Ukraine gets the EU. Every right. They're a sovereign nation. They can do whatever they want. And just saying they're a sovereign nation would be a breakthrough for the administration. Well, that's one. 2, I think there's a fundamental, not total appreciation of Washington of what's happening. Putin and Xi want to literally bury the United States. That is not a guess. That is what they said. They're here to replace the United States and the United States world order. They have more fear of the world order of what we have created than we have fully appreciate of the world order we created. Second, we have agreed with 2 basic premises. Sphere of influence, which is how you understand Greenland, Panama, the 51st state, Canada, and the Gulf of America. That's a sphere of influence. So we've accepted that premise as a rule. Then we've accepted might is right. When we used to believe in alliances, we're empowering empowering our adversaries and endangering the security of our allies. Now, I'm going to say this as an ambassador. We worked in the region creating a comprehensive export control with Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and the Dutch on China, getting technology that's essential for the Red Army. You tell me what country is signing up with the United States on the next technological embargo against China. There's no way a country is going to sign up and be a partner to the United States today. Second, we just finished in the South China Sea, where China is trying to basically intimidate the Philippines, the French, the Japanese, and the United States on a naval exercise that was planned. Deals don't come together on Thursday from Tuesday afternoon. Months ago, long time, 6 to 8 months ago. Who is going to stand with the American-led alliance with a treaty ally and steer down China? Because the only reason China hasn't gotten kinetic on the Philippines is there's this thing in the horizon. So you break up the idea of alliances and allies and friends, working out and engaging them and saying, okay, You don't want to do this. Tell me what you're going to do because this is not here. And Putin is losing in Ukraine. His economy is collapsed. His oligarchs are attacking the central banking system. Interest rates are at 21%. We're arguing about 4% in this country. And his inflation is at 10%. And he can't recruit anymore. And as according to the Wall Street Journal, a former paper that this gentleman used to work at, the war has stalled out. We are literally seizing victory from the jaws of defeat. Now, I think this is more dangerous. Now, do I think Democrats should go on there? Maybe a few Democrats should be screaming about this for the appropriate reason. But I wouldn't have it replace the core argument that you can't find any eggs at the eggs shelf, and yet everybody that's trying to protect us from bird flu has been fired. And this is not $7. It's going to be $9 in 2 years because these guys have fired all the scientists that can protect us from bird flu. That's where I would spend my time. But I think what's going on here, and I wouldn't get worked up on this if it wasn't, this is not, what happens in Ukraine will not stay in Ukraine. And if you think so, then I got a bridge over the Tigris River you can buy because we paid for it 4 times already.
We got a couple of minutes left because you got to catch up.
Yeah, I got to get going.
Gene, you got the last word.
My question is short. I hope the answer is long. You're now working with Senate Republicans. You just said that they've already had some influence over the president in his early actions. Other than Matt Gaetz, what do you got? What have they done?
Well, I think we're working on, and well, I know we're working on, again, reconciliation, some of the legislative items that the president has said that he wants to see. I think, though, your fundamental question is that you're not happy with the appointments that he's made.
I just don't see where they influenced him, so I'm just asking if you can tell me.
Sure, I think there are deputy cabinet members, there are other cabinet members' appointments that again, they've had influence over. I mean, certainly Matt Gaetz was a bridge too far, and they expressed that. But again, the other cabinet members, they've, just like Joni Ernst, we mentioned before, they've received assurances from Secretary Hegseth on some of his policy positions. So I think, again, they've performed their advice and consent role.
All right, we got to stop there. Although, happily, wine awaits, so we can continue the conversation over there. I want to thank these two guys who both endured the flight system to get here today, Ram and Alex. Thank you very much. And I hope as the Dole Institute, we can all do this again. Thank you. Stick around for a few minutes.
I gotta run. What's that?
Did your friend make it?